Hi guys, in this video I'm going to show you how to sketch quadratic graphs, or you may know it as quadratic functions. So you should be familiar with the general format of a quadratic expression, and that's in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. As you'll be sketching the graph of it, it will be in the form y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So that is just something that you need to be aware of. To be able to sketch a graph, you need to know three main things. You need to know the shape of it, the y-intercept, and the x values where the graph crosses the x-axis. So, how do I know what the shape is? Well, to find the shape, it's either going to be a U shape, which is positive, or it's going to be an upside down U, or an N shape, which is a negative. So how do you know whether it's a positive or a negative? Well, it comes from whatever the sign is of the coefficient of x squared, or the number in front of x squared. So if this value of a is positive, then your shape will always be this U shape. If your value of a is negative, then you will have this upside down shape. I have got examples of both for you, so hopefully that will help you to understand the difference between those. The y-intercept. The y-intercept is really quite easy. The y-intercept is basically whatever the number is at the end of your expression. So the value of c. Obviously, if it's plus c, then it would be, so say it was plus 5, your y-intercept would be positive 5. If it was minus 5, your y-intercept would be negative 5. And for your x values, where the graph crosses the x-axis, this comes from solving the equation. And what you need to be aware of there is when the equation is equal to 0. So basically what you would need to do is to just substitute y equals 0 in to your formula. So substitute y, substitute 0 for y, so you get 0 equals your quadratic equation, and then you know how to solve quadratic equations as well. So that's great. There is one other thing that you may be asked to find, and that is for the minimum or the maximum point on the graph. Now this comes by completing the square. So you have to complete the square on your quadratic equation to be able to find your minimum or your maximum point. Now, when just going back to the x values, it doesn't matter whether you use factorising the formula or completing the square to do this. However, if the question is asking you for the minimum and the maximum point as well, I would recommend that you just do completing the square to solve it as well, because you're going to have to complete the square to find the minimum and maximum point. Now, my next question is probably going to be, how do I know whether it's a minimum point or a maximum point? Well, if I look at a positive quadratic graph, I have got something that looks like that. That is a positive shape, is a U sort of shape. My graph comes down with a negative gradient, stationary points on my gradient is 0, and then it comes up to a positive gradient. This point here is my minimum point. These are obviously the x values that I found. Here is my y-intercept, and obviously I've got my shape. And then for the negative ones, as you can see, this gives me a maximum point. That would be my y-intercept, and these would be my 2x solutions. So basically, if you've got a positive quadratic, you have a minimum point. If you have a negative quadratic, you will have a maximum point. So my first one, I'm just going to show you by, I'm not going to find the minimum or the maximum points on this one. I'm just going to talk you through how to sketch a quadratic. This expression does factorise, so this is a nice easy one for us to get started with. So the three things that I need to know are the shape, the y-intercept, and the x values. Usually we'll have two, sometimes we'll have one, and sometimes it can happen where I don't have any. I do have one example where I don't have any x solutions, and I'll show you that one in a little bit. So I would recommend that you draw out just on the side these things to remind you that that's what you're going to need before you can even begin to sketch your graph. Now remember, it is a sketch, and therefore you don't need to measure it out. You don't need to do it all precisely on graph paper. It is just a sketch. So my shape, my value of A is 1. It's positive 1, and therefore my shape is going to be a positive U shape. My y-intercept is the value of C, which is the number on the end, or the number that is on its own. It may not necessarily always be at the end, it may be at the beginning, but please watch out for that. It's the one that's on its own. So my y-intercept is -12. Now I need to find my x values, so I'm going to need to solve it when the equation is equal to 0. So as I said in the instructions at the beginning, I'm just going to substitute y for 0. And as I said again at the beginning of this, I can actually factorise this. So I get 0 equals x plus 6, x minus 2. I'm not going to explain that, but basically I just needed two numbers that multiply to make -12 and two numbers that add to make +4, which got me the 6 and the -2. I then need to solve that to get me x plus 6 equals 0 and x minus 2 equals 0. That gets me my 2x values of x equals -6 because I subtract the 6 from both sides, and x equals +2 because I'm adding 2 to both sides. So those are my two x values. I'm not asking you to find the minimum point just yet. So I've got all the information that I need to be able to sketch it, and now that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to draw my axes. Please, please, please don't forget to label them, x and y. Don't risk losing marks just for not labelling x and y on your axes. So I know it's a U shape. My y-intercept is -12, so it's going to be somewhere on my y-axis down here. I know my two x values are going to be -6 and +2. I know it's going to be a U shape, so as you can see I've drawn those x values on there, which I've got from here. I know it's going to be a U shape, and the y-intercept must go through -12. Whoops. There you go, and that is that. Just label y equals x squared plus 4x minus 12. And also don't forget to label on your y-intercept on your y-axis. And that's it. That is how to sketch a quadratic graph. For the next ones, I am going to ask you to find the minimum or maximum points for each, and for all of the questions going forward on the worksheet that I will give for you, I would like you to use the completing the square method to find the maximum or the minimum point on each. So that was just the first example. The next one, we are going to find the maximum and minimum points and sketch from there. So things I need to know is shape, y-intercept, I'm going to put next my minimum or maximum, and then I'm going to find my two x values. So now I've set myself up nicely on the side. I know before I can start sketching, I need to have information for each of those things. So what shape is it? It's positive, so it's the U shape. My y-intercept is 7, positive 7 because I've got plus 7 here. To find my minimum and my maximum point, I need to complete the square. So to complete the square on this, I get x minus 5 all squared because I half that, negative 10. Take away this number squared, 5 squared is 25, so subtract that, and then I have still got the plus 7 that I need to take into consideration. Remember, it is y equals, so I need to keep that there. And to complete the square, I have got x minus 5 all squared minus 18. That is this same quadratic that I've got here. I've just completed the square. Now I can tell that it's going to be a minimum because it's this shape. So my minimum point comes from these two parts from completing the square. The x value is the opposite sign to what's inside the bracket. So I'm going to end up with a coordinate for my minimum point. So the opposite sign of what's in the bracket is going to be positive. So it's going to be a positive 5. Always is the opposite sign of what's in the bracket. And then the y value is whatever this number is. And you do not change the sign for that. So this one, you change the sign. This one, the sign stays the same. So my minimum point is going to be 5 minus 18. And then I need to find my x values. So to find my x values, as I said, I'm going to solve from what I have completed the square. So I know I have got y equals x minus 5 all squared minus 18. I'm going to substitute y for 0 and rewrite that. I'm going to add 18 to both sides, so I get 18 is equal to x minus 5 all squared. Now I know this is slightly backwards from the way that you usually work it out. It doesn't matter, it's exactly the same. I now need to square root both sides, so I get plus or minus the square root of 18 is equal to x minus 5. And then I need to add 5 to both sides to get me 5, positive 5, plus or minus the square root of 18 is equal to x. So my two x values that I get from this are 5 plus root 18 and x equals 5 minus root 18. Now I can use my calculator to find out the decimal values. I've just realised you can't see that, so there you go. So I can just use my calculator to find out those decimal values to give me an idea of what that looks like. So 5 plus root 18 is 9.24 to 3 significant figures, and 5 minus root 18 is 0.757 to 3 significant figures. Now I've got that, I can draw my sketch. So there's my axes, x and y, positive U shape with these both positive x values. So my positive x values are going to look something like that. My y-intercept is 7, so I'm going to label that on. my minimum point is 5 minus 18. Remember, it's just a sketch, so it doesn't have to be exact to scale. And then my two x values, just make sure you get them around the right way, 0.757 and 9.24. At this stage you could write the two values that you've got here. So the 0.757 is 5 minus root 18, and the 9.24 is the 5 plus root 18. Remember to just label it at the end as well. Okay, so let's look at the next example. So I need to know the shape, the y-intercept, the minimum or the maximum, and two x values that I'm expecting. So the shape, this value is positive, so it's a U shape. My y-intercept is -5. My minimum maximum point, I'm going to need to complete the square. Now I'm going to whiz through completing the square because I'm expecting that you are slightly happier with how to do this. So factorise out the factor of 2. So I get x squared plus 8x and then minus 5 on the end. I am then going to complete the square on this part. X plus 4 all squared minus 16 minus 5. Y equals, now expand these first set of brackets, x plus 4 squared, and then 2 times -16 gets me -32, not forgetting my -5 on the end. Y equals 2 x plus 4 squared minus 37. So it's going to be a minimum because it's a U shape, so my minimum point is going to be the opposite sign of the value here, so -4, and then the same sign as what's here, -37. So my minimum point is -4, -37. To find my x values, I now write 0 equals, and then this equation here, 2 lots of x plus 4 all squared minus 37. And now I'm just going to rearrange and solve it. Again, I'm not going to do it in huge detail, but add 37 to both sides. Divide both sides by 2. Square root both sides. Remember positive and negative. And subtract 4 from both sides. And I do believe I have worked these out already. Where am I? So I have got 0.301 to 3 significant figures, and x equals -4 minus root 37 over 2. Remember, the square root does need to go over the whole fraction, and that value is -8.3 to 3 significant figures. Now I've got all my information. 0.301, that's positive, and -8.3. I can now get on and sketch it. So I know it's a U shape, positive shape. My two x values, now I've got a very small positive value, so that's probably going to be quite close to 0 here. Not forgetting to label my x and y axis. And then I've got quite a large negative value. So I'm just going to bear that in mind when I'm sketching. I'm going to end up with something like that. Putting on my y-intercept, which was -5. Putting on my minimum point, which is -4, -37, and then my two x values, the +1 of 0.301 and the -1 of -8.3. Not forgetting to label y equals 2x squared plus 16x minus 5. And there we go. Third graph done. Next one, and I think I've only got one more after this. Yeah, so two more examples. Shape, y-intercept, minimum or maximum, and my two x values. So my shape, now this time I've got -x squared, so my shape is going to be that way round. My y-intercept is -2. It's going to be a maximum this time because of my shape being this, and then I can find my x values once I've completed my square to find my maximum. So y is equal to, factorise out the negative, I get x squared minus 6x minus 2, and then complete the square on this part, x minus 3 all squared minus 9 minus 2, y equals, expand the first set of brackets, x minus 3 all squared plus 9 this time minus 2, and simplify y equals minus x minus 3 all squared plus 7. So this time my maximum point is opposite sign of what's in the bracket, so now +3, and same sign that's inside the bracket, sorry, not inside the bracket, same sign as what I've got on the end, so I don't actually need the plus in there, it's just +7. So my maximum point now is 3, 7. Now to solve it, 0 equals minus x minus 3 all squared plus 7. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to add this to both sides. And by adding this to both sides, I get x minus 3 all squared is equal to 7. Square root both sides, x minus 3 is plus or minus root 7. And then add 3 to both sides, I get 3 plus or minus root 7. Two values then, x equals 3 plus root 7, which I'll find out the value in just a second, and 3 minus root 7, which I will also find out the value. So I have got 5.645 to 4 decimal places, and 0.3543 to 4 decimal places. Don't know why I've done to 4 decimal places this time, but that's what's written down on my page in front of me. So I can do that. I'm just going to write them up here to 3 significant figures because that's what we prefer working with. 0.354. And now to sketch. Now remember, this time we have got the negative shape that we worked out earlier. So I have got x and y. Both my x solutions were positive, and my maximum point is 3, 7. So I'm expecting it in this quadrant somewhere. My y-intercept is -2, so I do need to make sure that my graph goes through the negative y-axis. And then I've got something like that. It's not perfect, I haven't drawn it out exactly, but it's not bad. So labelling on, y-intercept -2, maximum point 0.37 and my two x values of 0.354 and 5.65. Not forgetting to label my graph as well. Okay, there we go. Last example for you then. Y equals x squared minus 4x plus 5. So again, list it out. Shape, y-intercept, maximum or minimum. I've done that the other way around to all of the others, but it doesn't really matter. And the two x values that I'm looking for. So what shape is it? It's positive, so it's the U shape. My y-intercept is positive 5. I'm going to end up with a minimum point because it's positive curve, and I'll find the minimum point and my x values when I complete the square. So y equals x minus 4x plus 5. Okay, I didn't complete the square there, I just wrote it out again. Let's complete the square on it. X minus 2 all squared minus 4 plus 5. Y equals x minus 2 all squared plus 1. So my minimum point is going to be opposite sign of inside the brackets, so positive 2, and then same sign of what's outside the brackets, so that remains as a positive 1. Now you will notice here that both of these values are positive, which means that it is going to lie in that first quadrant. Hopefully you have identified that positive 2 and positive 1 would make my minimum point here, roughly. I've just gone 2 across and 1 up. It's not again to scale, it's just a sketch. That means because I am working with a U shape, my graph is actually going to look like that. And as you can see, it has not gone through the x-axis. Now just to prove to you that I know I'm not looking for any x, or I know I haven't got any x values, is if I solve this, where I've completed the square, so make it equal to 0, x minus 2 all squared plus 1, I would subtract 1 from both sides and I'd get negative 1 equals x minus 2 all squared. And when I go to square root both sides, plus or minus the square root of negative 1 is x minus 2. If I then continue and add 2 to both sides, I get 2 plus the square root of negative 1 is equal to, plus or minus, sorry, is equal to x. Now when I type that into my calculator, 2 plus the square root of negative 1, I can't do it. I cannot square root a negative number, because either a positive times a positive gets me a positive, or a negative multiplied by a negative gets me a positive. There is no two numbers that we know of at GCSE level that will multiply by itself to get a negative number, and that is why there are no solutions for x. And therefore, going back to my sketch, I do just need to put on my y-intercept, which is 5, and my minimum point, which I worked out to be 2, 1. Final stage, just to label my graph. And there you go, sketching quadratic graph.